La, la, la.
Welcome once again to another episode of the Letterman podcast. I am Mike Chisholm. I am excited to be here. I hope you're not annoyed with me saying that because I'm going to be every single time I do one of these episodes. I love talking to all of the folks who are associated with the show, people who have been impacted by the show as I was. And it's just really cool to see this community growing. It's really kind of almost, I keep telling myself it's serendipitous that this community that we're building is growing, but also it's kind of crazy to watch Dave putting out new content. The day that we filmed this episode, Dave just put out a random talking head thing with Mary. I don't even think they were bringing up a clip, but it's just so cool to see Dave throwing out new stuff. Get to go see him next week in LA. I'm very excited about that. It's a good time to be a Letterman fan. And really, we haven't really, I mean, my next guest kind of like teases. It's been, we haven't really been saying it's a good time to be a Letterman fan because of new content for a long time. So it is a good time to be a David Letterman enthusiast and talk to people who were associated with the show. Today, we have a mammoth of a guest. I'm not just saying that because he looked good in a big suit and you just wanted to, I always thought Eddie Brill was a security guy when I would watch him. The camera would always cut to him. He'd be on the show so many times, so many impressions of Eddie Brill in my head, even before I knew who he was. You'd see him when it would cut over to Alan or to the podium, you'd see Eddie Brill standing there in a big suit. And I always thought, oh, that guy's security. Holy smokes, don't want to mess with that dude. Turns out Eddie Brill is actually a stand-up who I'm gonna put words in his mouth, had one of the most unique things a stand-up could ever have, as he was hired on for well over a decade, 15 years plus, the warm-up comedian for The Late Show with David Letterman. What a crazy job that is. And then also a booker for the show, but has done a lot of things outside of that as well. But it's hard not to get typecast when that is the role that you have. Eddie Brill, thank you for taking time out of your day to show up here on the Letterman podcast. I can't tell you how grateful I am that you're here.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. It's nice to meet you. It's nice to first of all, that you're a hockey fan, automatically that works in my favor, and our favor. And but yeah, no, it's really nice. I was at the show for 17 years. I had many jobs. It was a dream come true, and I still look at it as a dream come true. And like every once in a while, I'd be on the at the desk I'd look down and go, oh my God, that's David Letterman. It'd just be, even though I worked there for so long, it still was so cool to be there. And I was very proud of all the work we did there and the stuff I got to be part of and the people I got to meet. And, I'm so happy. And the crew and the staff were still friends all these years. And we all get together for meals and hangouts and keep in touch with each other. We're family. So it was beautiful. Yeah.
I appreciate that. We're going to get to the Letterman stuff because and I'll tell you this straight up. We're looking for folks who work for the show that want to be part of this community and will come back and come back and come back. The fact that you're a stand-up and I can get you to come back so I can plug dates, I'm very excited about that.
It's funny you would say that I look like a security person.
Yeah.
Arsenio Hall came on the show and he looked and he said, are you working security for this? Because, I used to dress up in like sweaters and leather jackets for the warm-up. And they decided that everyone on the stage was going to have to dress up. The band, Alan Coulter, myself, anyone who was going to be on that stage had to dress up. So it was kind of fun because I got to buy suits and ties. I have all these ties that I haven't used since the show, but I had, it was kind of fun dressing up and, but that's what Dave wanted, like even I remember I wore like a black suit and a black shirt and he was like, come on, Eddie, you look like a mafia guy, just put on a white shirt, look, more a little bright. But I live in the East Village in Manhattan. I've lived here most of my life and black is the school colors, so I would wear mostly black. But Dave changed that. And in fact, there was a segment once that said, what's Eddie Brill wearing today? And then they had me in I was dressed up in a brand new suit. I had lost all this weight and looked, the best I had in years. And it was, there was a lot of joking about that. But yeah, I stood on the side, and luckily I didn't have to be security.
Well, it's just, I love hearing that. I love hearing the fact that you were part of the aesthetic as to what Dave wanted on the stage, but I want to get to you. We're going to get to this, but this is your first episode on the Letterman podcast. And so I want to talk about the fact you grew up in New York. You're a New York comic. I know you spent some time in Boston too, but you're a New York comic, born and raised, right?
Yeah, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and I moved to Hollywood, Florida when I was just before my 12th birthday, and went to junior high school and high school down there, which is the opposite of Manhattan and Brooklyn. It was, very beach-like, and I loved it. It was good. I have a lot of friends still from there, and to, growing, I love sports and I love playing basketball. So, Florida was really great for me because I was outdoors every day and playing sports and jumping in the ocean and playing paddleball on the beach in Hollywood. And, it was a pretty good lifestyle. But I went to college in Boston because my uncle taught up in Massachusetts and recommended this college to me, where I met all my incredible, funny friends.
Yep.
And at Emerson. And what's interesting about Emerson is that Laurie Diamond, Dave's assistant, went to Emerson, and Michael Goldsmith, who also was a freshman with me in college, he worked at the show on the crew. Unfortunately, Michael had passed away while he was working there. But but it was kind of nice that these Emerson people were there, and they made me more comfortable, as if, as opposed to not, if I didn't know anyone. And I knew some people, but I didn't know them well. But Laurie really helped me to get closer to Dave. And it was mainly because of our Emerson connection, which was really nice.
That's fascinating. And the idea that you were part of, so would you consider yourself because Boston had a crazy comedy scene. And I think it sounds like you hit it. Did you come up with Stephen Wright and those guys?
Well, yeah, Stephen and Dennis Leary, we were all in college together. And, at Emerson, and then Mario Cantone came in, and Bill Burr. And I mean, the list goes on and on and on of all the Emerson people. And before us, it was Andrea Martin and Jay Leno and Henry Winkler and Norman Lear and
Absolutely.
Bill Dana. And then after us, it was, just on and on and on. Jennifer Coolidge, Jen Kirkman.
Rogan's a Boston comic.
I met Rogan when he was a skinny little kid. We were on the softball team together. I played first base. He played second. He was a skinny, and we laughed. We were dancing around while we were playing, and we didn't take things too seriously. I always liked him. We always got along very well.
Okay, so here's a little rabbit hole we can go down right now, because I know you're a big Carson guy. You had a Carson tribute comedy show that you did for years and years and years. The fact that you have that. You have that appreciation for him, and then you played on softball with Joe Rogan. There are many right now who would say that Joe Rogan, in many ways, is today's Johnny Carson. When you look at the size of his audience and the fact that there's a Rogan bump. We've had guests on my other podcast, my Men's Mental Wellness podcast, guests who have been guests on the Rogan podcast who experience the Rogan bump. There are comics with one appearance on that show that their career gets made. Sound familiar, right?
Yeah, it does happen. I was at the Ice House with my son, who's a comedian, Daniel, and the two of us were going to the Ice House. I think I was doing a set. I was doing the Ice House. They asked me if I did a set, would I look at some of their comics for the Letterman show?
Sure.
So as we went over there, my son had noticed that Rogan was recording there, doing a recording. And I said, oh, and I went in there and I said, hey, Rogan, on the break. And he went, hey, sit in with me. And I was only in there for 10 minutes, because I had to run and do this showcase.
Yeah.
But we mostly talked about Austin, Texas, and how we love Margie Coyle, who ran the Cap City Comedy Club. And it was a quick discussion, but it was just nice to talk to an old friend. And I did get, thousands of people who wrote to me and said, wow, we heard you on Rogan. And it wasn't like I was a guest. I just jumped in and sat down for 10 minutes, 8 minutes, something like that. So
Okay,
yeah,
well, I'll tell you this straight up. Rogan's building a comedy room in Austin right now.
yeah,
And he's gonna take the scene out of LA and he's gonna really transplant it. And I think he's trying to make his mark by building his version of the Comedy Store. If ever you get a gig there, you let me know. I will fly down to see that, to see you in that room. That'd be so cool. I love the camaraderie that comics have, and it's like the own little culture. Now, that being said, you alluded to it already, so let's go down that road a little bit. Comedy booker for Letterman.
Yeah, it was interesting because it changes your life. It all of a sudden you have, you're a comic and you're traveling and you have comedian friends, and now all of a sudden you have this job where you have to, of course, take it seriously, which I did, and know what the job meant, and have to, I couldn't go outside the parameters of what the job was. And I have thousands of people calling me and writing me and sending me tapes, and friends of friends sending me stuff, and I could only put less than 1% of them on television. So it was weird. In retrospect, there's part of me that wished I didn't book the show and that I worked on my own comedy career, because I spent 11 of the 17 years at Letterman booking the comics, and I had given up a lot of my own comedy life because I was working with other comics. So part of me loved giving opportunities to comedians, but it was also very hard for me to, it's funny that I see the pencil with the two erasers. I have one here. I have one around here somewhere.
I love this thing, man. Oh yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I kind of think, I was having around in the late 80s, early 90s, I was going to London a lot and spent a lot of time in Ireland and London working and having a good career. And then the Letterman booking thing made me spend a lot of my career helping others, which I always loved to do.
Yeah.
But in reality, if I look back, I'd say, if I could choose it again, I would probably have just chosen to just been a comic who worked on my own career. I don't regret it. I was able to help a lot of people, whether they were on television or not. I was, helping a lot of young men and women who were writing to me, and I was said, look, I don't care if you're not right for the show. Send me your stuff. You have something going. I think you have a career ahead of you, and and people like Hannibal Buress and Camille Nanjiani and, or a lot of people, Bill Burr early in his career, I was, getting these people on television, and it was really a nice thing to be able to do. And, there's, 50, 60 other comics probably that I was able to help during that time. So it was great, but it was interesting because as the warm-up of Letterman, I did the warm-up, and when the show was over, I'm out of there, going to do my stand-up, traveling the world on weekends. We had 3-day weekends. But once I was the booker, wherever I went, comics, even friends of mine, got a little nervous around me because, they were like, and I'm like, don't be nervous. It's me. It's still me. I'm here. I'm fighting for us behind the scenes. I promise you, it's not an easy job, and it was interesting. There was a guy recently who's kind of famous I asked him if he wanted to do this really cool show next month, May of 2022. And I called him, he didn't call me back. I called him again, he didn't call me back. And I called him and says, everything okay? And he said, oh, you didn't book me on Letterman back in the day, and you thought I was a hack, and you thought I was, not really good enough. And I go, not at all. I thought you were hilarious. And I never thought you were a hack. I never called you a hack. I think you're a fantastic comedian. And will you do this gig for me in May? And he apologized, and he said yes. There's a famous agent who called me and said, what happened? We used to be so close, and you're not using any of my clients to book on Letterman. I go, I don't know who your clients are. I don't book the Letterman show based on who the agent or manager is. I book it on the comedian, and if they fit the show and it was right. So there was, I love the warm up. I worked my ass off making sure that happened. In every commercial break in the Letterman show, I got to go to the desk, whether it was to have a discussion with Dave, talk about the Beatles, talk about sports, talk about the next segment, come up with questions and ideas for other segments. It was always amazing for me to be part of that and to have his ear during that. But as far as the booking was concerned, there's a little bit of regret, but I did it, and I'm happy that in the long run, that I had this, I had a show that I respect with all my heart. I was able to have a part in it, which is nice.
You have done a phenomenal job. We didn't do a pre-interview because I think they're bunk. We talked about that a little bit, how we both kind of feel that way. You've gone through 3 different areas here that I do want to get into, whether we get into them all today or not. The first one is a quick one. I think we can kind of move away from. The second one is one that I really want to pick your brain about. That's about clean comedy and the debate between the two types of comedy, blue versus clean. But the first one is this. And then the third one we'll get to after. And then we still got to talk hockey. By the way, I hope you don't hold it against me. I'm a gigantic Los Angeles Kings fan, like gigantic.
No.
Since I was a kid.
I was before the pandemic, the Kings were in town playing the Rangers, and the whole team came to the show at Caroline's. And it was a thrill for me because I knew all of them, because I know the teams and I'm a hockey fanatic, and I was doing hockey material and ad-libbing, and ended up getting the phone numbers of like the assistant coaches and some people on the team. So now I have this when I go to LA to see the Kings play. Luke Robitaille, who's number 20 from
my man,
there, was a Ranger, and it's like, so I'm a New York Ranger fan. I grew up in New York. 1969-70, the Mets won the World Series on my birthday. I went to the Knicks championship 7th game. The Rangers made it to the Stanley Cup quarterfinals, and the Jets won the Super Bowl. So as a little boy, those solidified my teams. I love hockey. I can't believe that I have to wait another night before the Rangers play Carolina, but so be it. There's a game tomorrow night, and I wish it was tonight.
Well, that's why I thought you were going to hold it against me, because in you and I both we both know what curses are like. The curse of the Rangers was so long. You got it as a younger fan in '94. You got that release and that relief. And if your team hasn't won the Stanley Cup, the release and the relief is every bit as good as you ever would think it is. By the way, God. It's great. The greatest. You're still cashing checks on that '94 win right now.
Oh, so much so. And then but when the Kings were playing the Rangers in the finals, I was
14.
I was working in San Diego with the Comedy Store with my son. So we're watching the game on TV, not looking at each other on stage. Yeah. And when they were done with whoever was on stage was done with their set, we had to go on during the game. It was like, no, we don't want to miss this. But I got to see most of the action, except for the 45 minutes I was on stage. But I don't hold, there's very few teams I don't like in hockey. Right. Like there's a lot of teams I like. I worked for the Red Wings. I worked for the Bruins. I worked, Dave Strader, who was the announcer for the Red Wings and eventually the announcer for the NHL. We met at a gig I was doing in the Cayman Islands. We became best friends. He got me involved with the Red Wing team. I went to this party. He sat me down in this chair, and like Keith Tkachuk was a rookie on one side and Steve Yzerman was on the other side. And I ended up working for them and raising money for the Children's Hospital. I went to Vegas to do a TV show with Robert Schimmel. Yep. And it was the year that the Red Wings were the best team in hockey, but they lost to the San Jose Sharks. Yep. On a fluke goal in this thing. And all of a sudden they show up at the hotel. I get the whole team into the taping. And then it was just a week of frolic and craziness with these incredible hockey players. I became really great friends with Steve Chason, who unfortunately lost his life at an early time, but I was really close. It was, it was almost like I'm friends with Dick Cavett, which is a very bizarre, wow. I got involved because of Johnny Carson. Dick used to work for Johnny. Sure. He's from Nebraska. We ran this comedy festival. We had Dick involved, and we didn't have Dick involved. We have Dick Cavett involved. Dick came on the thing, and we became instant friends. It's very surreal, the people I've met in my life. I never take it for granted that those kind of things happen. And the same thing in hockey. I see Yzerman, even though he's a general manager now, we hung out. We spend time together. It's like a little boy's dream come true to get together with the stars of the sport you love and hang out with them and raise money for kids. And you see how wonderful these people are, because no matter how tough they are on the ice, their hockey happens to be the one sport of, and the others too, but the one that I've been involved with, mostly raising money. I helped with the beginning with the Hockey in Harlem program with the Rangers, the Bruins, and the Cam Neely Cancer Foundation. So, you know, I can go on and on, but I don't even know if we started this conversation. It was a hockey thing, right?
Oh, no, absolutely.
So I don't hate.
And
I don't hate them.
one day, I'll tell you my story. I was supposed to be at Game 5 of the LA New York Ranger, but I was seeing that guy. I was seeing Rogan, and I've actually got a picture of Rogan holding. He doesn't even understand why. I've got a picture of me and Rogan. He's holding an LA Kings puck while I'm wearing I got a Dustin Brown jersey I was wearing from that night, because I was supposed to be down there, but instead I was seeing Joe Rogan. You know, but to go on to what you just said, the blessings in life, I too have been blessed with a lot of very cool, surreal type experiences where the people around me who grew up with me, who I'm still friends with, kind of look at me and go, I can't believe you've had happen what has had happened in your life. You are that statement on steroids. And I want to go back to that first topic. I think about Paul Schaefer in the band. And I think, okay, you're a musician and you're a top tier musician, a really good one, could be studio, loves to perform though. And suddenly getting a gig that for some of those guys, like think about Will, a 30-year gig. And as a comic, it's kind of the same thing. You alluded to this earlier. As a comic, you got plucked from the road, plucked from the from all of the culture of what stand-up comedy is in many ways. I know you still performed, you still traveled, you still do you think, but working for the Late Show 17 years, not just as a comic, but with other duties as well. That's a hungry beast, and your act, of course, is gonna suffer from that. But it's the gig that, you know, you're playing the same room for 17 years. You know that your certainty is the same. All of these things are lined up that virtually no comic gets to enjoy. What a unique place in history that is.
Yeah, well, you know, it's really who you know, and it's the luck of where you're at. I was, you know, I warmed up a few other shows in history, and some were big, and one of the biggest ones was the Dana Carvey show, which didn't last very long.
It was awesome,
you
though.
know, yeah, it was a brilliant show. It was
the Mountain Dew Dana Carvey
television.
show.
Yeah, it was pretty good. And it was interesting because, you know, Robert Smigel was one of the producers, and Louis C.K. was one of the producers, and Steve Carell and Colbert. And I mean, it's just you know, just all these top-notch creative people working together. And when the show went down, Louis went to work at Letterman as a writer. And then Dave was looking for a new warm-up, and they asked Louis, they said, who would you recommend? He said, well, Eddie Brill did Dana Carvey, and he was great, and you should get him. So because of that connection, I was able to have a 6-week trial period that turned into 17 years. I, you know, met Dave once before for a minute when I was in LA at the Comedy Store. Mitchell Walters introduced us together. So I said, yeah, Dave, I was a regular at the Comedy Store, and Mitzi used to compare us a lot, not as comics, but the kind of person that they wanted to put on the show early on as like a host type, someone who comes out and gets the audience going right away. And it really helped. It helped that I was recommended by the other comics that were working at the show. And it also helps that we shared the love of Mitzi Shore, Paulie's mom, who treated Dave and I, and my son, who's a comedian, Dan, treated us as family. And so all of that concoction turned out to be the great brew that got me over there. And 6 weeks turned into 17 years, which was beautiful. And I got to do other things, like if Alan Coulter was not there, oftentimes I got to do the opening announcement, which was great. And it was overwhelming because you hear the band playing that song and the audience is applauding. The very first time I did it, I had to redo it later after the show was recorded, because there was I was so excited in my voice, it sounded like I was 12. So I had to go down and re-record into the studio and re-record the from New York, the greatest city in the world, that whole thing.
Oh yeah.
And that was a thrill for me. And I got to do skits, and it was a dream come true, and I'm glad that it came true.
So the trade-off of maybe not being able to hone the act and go on the road and do all those things that you're talking about, the things that I love the fact that it's always in the eye of the beholder, and the fact that you can say, you know what, if I were to do it again, I'd love the experience of, I love that you're so vulnerable enough to say that. That's fantastic. That being said, the trade-off is all the cool one-off stuff you got to do because of that. But I want to go back to your act for a second. There's a saying out there in the business world, you don't say new things to old people, you say old things to new people. And you got a chance to do that every night. So
right.
you got to work on your act for the audience. Did it change very much over the years?
Yeah, it changed a few times, but not a lot, because we had something down that worked like a science. That is what I understand. Dave was taught by the producers of the Johnny Carson show how to create a pre-show, not let the audience sit there forever. I mean, the doors would open at 5:00 like clockwork, and at 5:12:00 the warm-up would start, and at 5:30:00 the show would start recording. There was no like 5:30 and 1 second. It was down to the science. The audience
was a clock.
The audience were seated and ready to go in 12 minutes, and it's 492 people. Now, just backing it up a little bit, I still work the whole time as a stand-up all over the world, despite the fact that, I'm partially to blame, or mostly to blame, for not always writing a new act. But I was so focused on helping other comedians that I just did what I did. And, so the truth is I could have still written new stuff, but I was so focused on other people's stuff that I didn't really spend the time writing a lot of new stuff for myself. So I did what worked, and and that kind of worked against me.
But you had a lot of spinning plates, though, man. Like, a lot of spinning plates.
Of my life. But now that the Letterman show is over, I am writing new stuff. Even during the pandemic, I've written so much new material, and it's just flowing out like a river. But the warm-up, we had 5 minutes of video, 5 minutes of me, 5 minutes of the band, and 3 minutes of Dave. 18 minutes, down to a science. The band played the same songs. I did the same routine mostly until I changed it, like, say, 6 months down the line, because we knew it worked. Yeah. And I was able to tell Dave what the audience was like based on the audience's reaction to the warm-up and the music. And he would send one of his assistants down, and I would give them the signal. It's a great audience. It's good. They suck. Yep. All the different, whatever signal I had to give her while the band was playing, or one of the people. And so Dave knew in advance what the audience was like, and that was good. For every comic wants to know what the audience is like, and Dave was no different. And he was able to, I guess it helped him be, with the warm-up, by knowing what the audience was like based on what I had sensed. And I'd say 98% of the time I knew the audience pretty well. Every once in a while you'd be fooled by them, but very rarely.
So great question about that, in the sense of, did you watch Dave on the fly? Because one of the things that the admirers of Dave love is how clever and how quick he is. Would you basically give him the playbook of what to expect tonight for the audience? And could you see him then kind of lean into that and adjust his performance that night, whether he would get them involved more, whether he would do things based on how the temperament of the audience was?
I didn't talk to him. I only made a signal to his associate.
Sure.
So he would come down knowing what to expect. And that definitely helped him to prepare for how he was going to pull it off. And it was up to him if he was in a mood to, to turn it around and get, if the audience was not great, and to take it up a notch. He's a pro, the pro's pro, and he was able to do that. And there were some nights where, he wasn't happy that the crowd wasn't great. And then he would just he wouldn't try to, like, fuck them, kind of attitude, but that was very rare. The audience were mostly fantastic. The audience were really excited to be there. and they weren't tired because they were in there, and boom, the show started, boom, it was over. They had a great experience, and they're in and out. So they really did have a good time. The interesting thing is that a lot of those audiences were mostly from out of town, and a lot of people from other countries, because this is like an e-ticket at Disney World for these people. They're going to go to the Empire State Building, they're going to go to Times Square, they're going to go to the David Letterman show. I mean, these were all part of the thing. And this wasn't always Dave Letterman fans or people who spoke English as their first language. It was interesting. One of the times I was on stage, and Dave, I think Eli Manning his plane was delayed because of the weather. Yep. And they asked me to put a set together. And while the show was being recorded, they said, can you put a set together? So I went backstage, I put a set together, and I didn't have an opening joke, because in stand-up on television, you only get 4.5 minutes, and you need a quick joke. Like, my grandmother told me the truth will set you free. And she went to prison for perjury. Boom. Those are the kind of jokes you start off with to let the audience know that you're funny, you're going to be funny. They don't have to worry, that kind of thing. So I didn't have one for this set. I couldn't think of one, but I had written something at home that I thought was really funny, based on New York subway stations. There's 2 major train stations in New York, Grand Central and Penn Station. And there's a very famous line, it's like Grand Central Station in there. It means it's crowded. So I wrote a joke. I said, the other day I was in Penn Station. It was so crowded, it was like Grand Central Station in there. Now, to New Yorkers, that's a funny joke.
Yep.
But to people from other countries, they have no idea what it's talking about. I did that joke forgetting that the audience was mostly out of towners, 99% out of towners, and 20% people from countries that didn't even speak English. And the audience didn't get it. The only laugh I got was from Bruce Kapler, who was the sax player. He laughed because it just sat there and bombed. And at the end of the set, Letterman went up to me and said, "How did you think that went?" We were all family, and we're giving each other shit, when that happened. Yep. The set worked, but it took me a little bit of time to get them.
You did 11 shots on 10 shots on Late Show.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy in itself. The fact that you got to do your act on national television also, like, you're the warm-up guy for the Letterman, but you also got to do 10 shots as a comic. So it's almost like what you gave up was still given back to you in that experience. I mean, holy smokes, what!
And I always wrote a brand new set for the every time I did the show as a guest. I always wrote a new set. The very first set, I had older jokes, but I had always written new stuff for each appearance. It was just a challenge for me to write new stuff and to create it for the show. And it was really fun to be able to do that. And I had, pretty good sets. I was proud of it. And I had been on the show many times before I was booking it. Then when I started booking it, I didn't do it that much because I felt really weird. Like, I can't give these people spots, but I'm going to put myself on.
Yep.
But even though I put myself on, I had to get approved by the show. I had to get the material approved by the producers. I had to get my material approved from Standards and Practices,
Sure.
And then I didn't do the show for like 6 years I was booking it. And Dave said, "How come you're not on the show?" I go, "Because he says, "I'm booking it." And he says, "You work here, do the show, be on the show." And I went, "Okay." And then
seal of approval from the man. There you go.
Yeah. But a lot of comedians are like, "You're doing the show, of course you're doing the show, you're booking it." And I'm like, "It's not what you think."
Well, that's sour grapes, and I mean, they would take the same opportunity. Any comic would take the same opportunity, especially if given the gold seal. I think about the time when, were there any of your appearances ever? Oh, we got a cover for something here. Yeah, throw Eddie up. Like, I think about Bill Sheft. And how he went up once when the stuff with Bill Hicks happened, and it's like, okay, let's throw Bill up there. Did that ever happen to you, or were all of your appearances
only that
scheduled?
Only that one time when I was on the set? The other 9 were all planned, and ready to go and ready to do it. But I had, Brian Kiley, who's a great comedy writer, grew up with Conan O'Brien, wrote for Conan O'Brien, moved to LA when Conan moved to LA.
Yeah.
He worked at Conan down the street from us when we were in New York together, Conan and Letterman. And Brian, brilliant comedian, a lot of one-liners, and he was perfect for the show and one of Dave's favorite comics. So Brian and I would have a set ready. So if someone didn't show up, I just called Brian on the phone. He had a suit and tie hanging in his office, all freshly pressed, and he would run over to the show from Conan, and he would do the show, and he would, of course, crush because we had the set worked out in advance.
Yep.
That happened a couple of times. Mark Maron was another one who I would use last minute. We would have sets ready to go in case Brian had recently done the show and we had another last minute kind of a thing,
Mark Maron, another Boston comic, right?
Yeah, well, he didn't start in Boston. He's not from Boston, but
okay.
I remember in the early days, we all worked in, like, I'm not from Boston, but I went to college there.
Yeah.
And I started doing stand-up there. I started in improv and sketch at college. And then I started doing stand-up because my friends were doing it. And then I quit for a long time until I moved. When I moved back to New York, I had the opportunity to run a comedy club in the Village called the Boston Comedy Club. It was called the Paper Moon. And in 1984, I started running it. In 1988, I gave it to the guy who made it the Boston Comedy Club, changed the name. And so it kind of has a long, long history. And I was there. Colin Quinn and I were sort of there at the beginning. Adam Sandler went to NYU down the street. Susie Essman, a bunch of us were all young comics, and we, Mario Cantone, and we all were working out at this comedy club. It was a really good time, and we all looked out for each other, and we still do.
Eddie, the career you've had it's unique, and something isn't really unique, or it's just unique. It is, wow. You've had such a breadth of experience when it comes to comedy, and those of us who love comedy, I mean, I think any of us would want to trade places to know what it feels like to have the experiences that you've had. I want to talk about clean comedy versus blue comedy.
All right,
yeah, no. I mean, this is, again, we're going to ask you on again.
It's a very important category, because clean comedy doesn't mean good comedy. Clean comedy doesn't, like if you do television and you're doing the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, your set it wasn't about being clean, it was about being smart. And that's the big difference. Letterman and Carson love smart comics. Smart and silly would be the category I would put them in. And, you could do a clean set and it's just milk toast, and you would never get on Letterman or Carson with those kind of sets. There was an edge, and edgy doesn't mean dirty. Edgy doesn't mean you use certain kind of language. Edgy means you have an edge to you. Edgy means you're very smart. Like Richard Pryor did, the Tom Jones show, which was an incredible show where he broke a lot of people, like, Curtis Mayfield and, Janis Joplin and all these kind of comedians and the singers who weren't getting in on the regular shows because they were known to be controversial, or society wasn't ready, to be open-minded about other human beings. They were taught poorly. And, so I would say that Pryor, when he did the Tom Jones show, or when he did the Ed Sullivan show, he did the material that was, right for network television. But I wouldn't say that it was clean. I would say it was smart. So, a lot of people say, well, you got to have clean comedy. Well, you don't have to be clean. If you talk about politics and religion, or, anything that is a little bit shakes people up, they don't consider that clean comedy, which is a mistake. It's, people think edgy means dirty, and that clean means, it's safe for everybody. But safe for everybody is not great, to me. I mean, personally, it's not my favorite kind of comedy. Right. Safe for everybody is just like, just being careful. It's just like, the new Christy minstrel singers, you're the, you're singing, you're up with people, that kind of stuff from my childhood, was never really sexy or fun or smart or, soulful. It's like the difference between Celine Dion and Nina Simone. Celine Dion gets all the notes right, and she's painting by numbers, and there's no real soul to it for me. But when Nina Simone sings, it's only soul, and that's what I think of comics. I think of comics as being soulful and not being clean or dirty.
I really appreciate your point of view on this, and you have a very unique one. There's only a handful of guys and gals who have had the perspective based on what you were looking for, booking a major network television show, late night program. And the idea though, but when you look at like Coke and Pepsi, right? If you look at the offering of the Tonight Show during those years versus what you guys were doing, I think it was Bill Carter who brought this idea out that a lot of people would compare what Leno was doing, and no offense to anybody, it's just they're very, very different guys, to pop music. And pop music goes out to the masses and all that stuff. Whereas, you got like a Michael Jackson, whereas David Letterman was like Pink Floyd or like Radiohead or really the cerebral, the complex stuff. And I love that you made that distinction, smart as opposed to clean. Now, that being said, you could see a Bill Burr on Letterman, for example, watch him smart beyond edgy, like what you're talking about. But then you go see him in the club and you're like, whoa, because then the chains have been removed of the shackles of standards and practices.
Right.
Were there any comedians who couldn't get there that you wished could have gotten there? They couldn't take their act and translate
and I
it
don't
over?
want to mention any names.
Sure.
There are comedians who I loved who we couldn't put on the show because it didn't fit the show, like producers or whatever would say, no, not for us, or whatever. I mostly knew what to do, but there were times when the show was like, and they turned someone down or whatever. And I wish they could have gotten on the show, and they didn't. And it's a shame. And, but that's the way it is. It's not the Eddie Brill show, it's David Letterman show. So I had a book with what Dave wanted and had in mind. And, and I know he appreciated these, one of kind comedians like the Eddie Izzards and a lot of the British and Irish comics that I had booked from Europe on the show, like Tommy Tiernan, was amazing comic in Ireland. And he was one of the first Irish comics to really just hit Letterman, and did Letterman like 4 times as a guest. Harry Hill was an incredible comedian who did this one bit where it was just fast, rapid fire, comedy. And he would go, here's open his suit up and go, what do you think of the lining? It's the best material I got. And Letterman would laugh so hard at it. He would do that joke like every, like as a homage to Harry Hill constantly. And if I was Harry Hill, I'd be thrilled that Letterman's using my stuff. And that happened to a lot of comedians where they would have like one line that I remember Karen Rontowski did the show, and she had this line that was like, I wear Santa Claus panties because I always know it'll be Christmas in my pants, or something like that. And, that's the kind of line that sticks with Dave, forever. Like Tommy Johnigan had a line that Dave would say all the time. Hugh Fink, this great comedy writer and comedian, he would do this thing about being a third base coach. And that was his skit. And he'd go, come on, Bobby. Come on, Bobby. And he'd just go, all right, Bobby. Yeah. Come on, Bobby. And then Dave would say that all the time. Come on, Bobby. And no one would understand what was being said. They didn't know it was a reference to, something ages ago, but something that always made Dave laugh, and that he kept doing that.
I think that there is a part of the community of folks who are who would consider themselves enthusiasts of what Dave and Co did. And I always say Dave and Co because it was all you guys. You created a culture there, including the audience who, Dave would only interact with this way here, but they got to be prepped for it. That was one. You had a lot of plates that made that show work. So the fact that I think that a lot of enthusiasts who Dave and Company, we love those inside jokes. We're the ones that when we would go at the end of the show to the band, hey, are those your drums? Like the long joke, the thing that he would say over and over and over again over the years without any payoff. And then suddenly there's some sort of payoff to it or callback to it. And right. I think you were at the epicenter of that. I just got to ask, this is a personal one here. Did you ever cross paths with Mitch Hedberg?
Yeah. Zoe Friedman, who's Bud Friedman's daughter, was working at the show before I was. In fact, she got me on the show. She had put me as a guest on the show, and she had found a lot of comedians like Jim Gaffigan and Ray Romano and Mitch Hedberg was one of them, who she booked on the show. And then when she was gone, because she got this killer gig at Comedy Central, I was the booker. So I got to book Hedberg, and it wasn't like I discovered him. I just booked him. You know, it was, I might look like a hero, but Zoe was the hero when it came to Hedberg. She was smart enough to know that he was the man. And I remember there was Elvis Costello was my hero. If you look behind me, there's a Costello poster.
Fantastic.
And one of the shows when Dave got sick was hosted by Elvis Costello. When we had guest hosts, we had an extra guest in every show, and there was always a comedian. So that show already had Eddie Izzard, not as a stand-up, but as someone sitting down at the panel. So I had to find a stand-up. Now, I would have loved to be on that show. I would have begged to be on the show, but I was recently on the show on another episode, so I couldn't. So I thought, who would be the most perfect comic to be with Elvis Costello and Eddie Izzard? And Mitch Hedberg was the guy, you know.
That's an intellectual night, man. That's a night. Oh, that's a fantastic show.
It's a smart night.
Yeah.
Of incredible, you know, just, you know, incredible artists. And, you know, and I knew that Hedberg was the right comic in there. Selfishly, I wanted to be on the show, but, you know, I knew that it wasn't the right thing to do. And Hedberg, you know, so, and I'd worked with Hedberg a lot. You know, we had worked in the Cayman Islands together. You know, we had, there was an incredible gig down there where it's paradise. And, you know, you didn't make a lot of money, but you were in paradise for like a week or two. And Hedberg and I worked down there. And so I knew him pretty well. I knew his mom, Mary, very well. And even after Hedberg had passed away, Mary and I kept in touch. And she was doing a bunch of events and wanted some tapes of her son, and I'd help her to secure them. And
that's really, really cool. Hedberg's one of those guys when you talk about smart, you know, versus he did not have to throw anything into his comedy that was even edgy, but you talk about the clever and how he could the turn of phrases, and that's what we love about Dave too, and all the people that surround him. The wordsmith aspect of it is a huge part. I want to show a couple of there's the man right there.
Yeah, I think that was wearing a tie and a jacket and shirt that wasn't white. And that was outside of the theater, coming to the theater. And I think that, you know, one of the thing behind me was one of these like vans that would house extras or animals. If, you know, there was an animal, you know, Jack was on the show, or, you know, it was just like that. So there was a van behind me there. And, you know, sometimes it would be, very rarely was there a van back there, unless it was, you know, a bus that belonged to Willie Nelson, or a van that housed the actors, because there wasn't enough room with all the guests to also put all the actors in dressing rooms. So we made sure that we treated the guests very well, and every guest will tell you that. The Letterman show sort of we were, you know, told and kept, you know, treat the guests like gold, and we did. I'm pretty sure that most everybody who's ever been in the show will back up and say, yeah, we were treated well. Every whim, everything we wanted. And
just below that, you and Billy Sheft.
Yeah, we were over there, and we would stand on, you know, I had two places where I stood at the beginning. First half of the show, I was behind the camera too, which was Dave Dorset. Dave Dorset was Walter Cronkite's cameraman, and you know, he was one of the best camera people in the history of television. And I spent the first half of the show behind him, and then the second half, or the 2/3, on the side there with Billy. And Billy left the show for a while, was working on his own book, and he was going to leave the show, and then I guess he missed it and came back. But there was a good year or so where he wasn't there.
You probably worked with him every day, and I mean, you guys probably had a unique dynamic compared to everybody else on the show as well.
Kind of, you know, I didn't go to I never really hung out with the writers, and he was mainly a writer on the show, and so I didn't really hang out with them. But Bill was on the set, and you know, we loved the Beatles, him and I and Dave. We would talk Beatles all the time, and you know, we talked music all the time, and we talked comics, and You know, Bill and I didn't always love the same comics, but you know, we have a history. We worked together in the past. I remember we had a show once. It was booked just outside of Atlantic City, and when we got to the place, the parking lot was empty, but it was filthy because Joan Jett and the Blackhearts had worked the night before, and they didn't clean up the parking lot. And we get to this gig, and I think it was a 600 seat venue, and there were 3 people in the audience, a husband, a wife, and the husband's mother. And so they canceled the show and they paid us. I think it was like $250 each. And Bill and I just said, you know, we're here near Atlantic City. Let's go to Atlantic City. And we both won money in Atlantic City, and we didn't have to work, and we got paid. We took our paid money, made more money on that, and drove home. I remember that clearly. It was one of the first real hangouts with Bill Sheft and I.
That's a great night.
Yeah.
Eddie, I thank you for your time here. I'm going to do one more picture here, kind of to send us off, because to me, it encapsulates you. There's so much joy in this picture here. I want to show. There's another one that I'm going to save for the next time that you're on. And I'm presupposing that, by the way, that you will be on again and we can talk about it. It's a,
sure.
I'll tease the audience. It's a picture with you guys. Thank you for that. It's a picture with you guys at the scrum at the desk. We didn't even get to the scrum at the desk. I think that, as enthusiasts, a lot of us always wondered what the heck happened there. We're going to save that, and I'll give the audience.
And by the way, Dave, Bill, and I would go to hockey games often. Dave loved going to hockey games, and there are photos that were taken by photographers, professionals, where me and Dave are cheering on. He liked original 6 only. Was what he really liked. He loved the original 6, and if there was a game, but he also loved Ovechkin. And we went to see. Yeah, how can you not love Ovechkin as a player?
Absolutely,
crazy good. And so there was a bunch of photos when we went to see the Rangers Capitals playoff game together. And so just so you know, awesome. And I remember Marv Albert made fun of Dave the next day. And because Marv said, "Oh, I saw photos that you were at the hockey game. You probably left early." And Dave got he was like, "No, we didn't. In fact, we stayed for the 3 stars, which we did, to find, because I don't leave the hockey game until I know who the 3 stars are,
Okay, I've never said this really out loud to anybody, because I'm one of those fans that are enthusiasts that keep some of these memories locked away that nobody really appreciates or can identify with because they're personal. But one of the ones, 2010, when Canada won Canada-US finals, the golden goal, Sidney Crosby came in overtime and won the thing. And my favorite segment on your guys' show, was the first segment after the monologue. I love that. If I was having a crappy day, I just knew that I had that waiting for me at night, where Dave would just talk to the audience. And sometimes there was a comedy piece that was sitting there that he would just ignore and do his thing. Right. I'm right up on that, right? Like that's right. That segment.
Yeah.
The night after Canada won the Olympic in Vancouver, won the Olympic gold medal.
I remember it well.
Dave talking about that. I'll never forget this moment. Actually, it's something I want to pester Don Giller to get me the clip for one day, because it just made me smile so big that next day. Like, people were, when that goal was scored, suddenly outside of every house you could hear horns honking and things happen. It was a big fucking deal when we won that game.
Yeah,
and Letterman, the next night, he gets on there and he starts doing his segment. I don't know if he ignored a piece of comedy or not, but he started talking about, did you see the gold medal game last night? Did you see what happened? And he talked about it. He goes, about halfway through the game, I think, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is my memory. Halfway through the game, I'm sitting there going, I hope the Canadians win.
Yeah, we talked about that because not before the show, but in the early segment, because I was the same way. When the game, I was like, I really hope Canada wins, because this is their game and they need to win it. That's how I felt. I felt like, look, we're American and we're doing really well for the first time against Canadians. When the Americans beat the Canadians in the juniors, it was unbelievable that could ever happen in the history of hockey. Yep. And so, and I was excited and it was great. I remember filming a TV show, and I can't think of the guy's name, out of Toronto. He used to have a TV show, and I filmed this show, and the juniors were going on at the time, and I can't believe I can't remember the guy's name. But anyway,
Mike Bullard, George Stromanopoulos.
Bullard.
There you go. Yep.
Yeah. And what a great guy, I love doing this show. Ty Domi was also a guest on the show that I did. And who had a head like it was very misshapen. And but anyway, so I remember after when Sidney Crosby scored that goal, I was like, good for the Canadians. And so we had that discussion the next day, and I guess I don't remember how it went down, but we talked about it and we were happy because it really, it was much more meaningful for you guys. And it was kind of interesting how we were like, look, that's a major goal would have been for us, but good for the Canadians.
Yeah, man. I love that we connected on that. No pre-interview here, but I'm very, very glad that you remember that. I got one final question,
Sure.
and then I'm going to show this picture, and then we're going to sign off for this episode. Before that, plug some gigs. This is going to go up in about a week.
What do you
got going on, May?
On Twitter, it's Eddie_Brill.
Yep.
At Eddie Comic is my Instagram name. At Eddie Comic.
At Eddie Comic on Instagram. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm on Facebook, and I put a lot of stories on Facebook. There are a ton of them, but I'm pretty much full. But if you follow me, you can read the stories I wrote. And I write a lot of stories about what happened at Letterman, about the Rickles episode. That Rickles mentioned that he loved me on the air, and I told the Joan Rivers story, and I tell a lot of Letterman stories on that. So if you go to Facebook under Eddie Brill, just follow me and you'll be able to read a lot of the stories I write. But I think I'm pretty full there. As far as gigs, I have a ton of gigs coming up. I have in Suffern, New York, one of my favorite little venues called the Rhino. It seats about 100 people comfortably, and it's just maybe 80 people, and it's just the most beautiful room you could ever work. And I'm doing a bunch of benefits for Ukraine. We just did one a week and a half ago. We got another one coming up soon in I think May 1st or May 2nd. The Paper Moon, the comedy club I used to run, is now a jazz club called the Zinc Bar. I'm there on Sunday, May 1st. I mean, I have a whole bunch of gigs coming up.
That's fun. Performing at that club must be a special kind of night.
It's a thrill to be there, to remember all those years ago. And I just had a meeting with this guy at a club in New York, and we're going to try to do a Eddie Brill and Friends every month, and that's going to probably start in May or June.
My wife and I talk about constantly how New York is our favorite American city. My wife's building a men's mental wellness app right now, and when that thing blows up, we're gonna be traveling to New York quite a bit. When that happens, I cannot wait to come see you and break bread and support what it is you're doing. I can't wait till you're back on the show again. My last question: if there's three people, if you got a list of three people who you'd like to see on my next guest, who are those three people?
Oh, on Letterman's.
No. Oh, sorry. On my next guest needs no introduction. No, not this little dog and pony show. Yeah. No. On the Netflix show.
That's interesting. There are people. It's mostly the people that are no longer alive who I'm. Like Carson. Would have loved to see Dave talk to him, or John Lennon. That kind of thing. I think he loved Elvis Costello, so I would like, of course, to see him talk to Elvis. I'd love to see him talk to Mel Brooks. I think that would be a great interview, because Mel is, on the Cavett shows, he was brilliant. And I love, great directors and that kind of thing. And, I don't know, as far as actors, maybe an hour with Sophia Loren, that would just be thrilling for me to see. So those are three people who are still alive that I would want to see on the show.
Thank you for that. That's awesome. I appreciate that. This is, I see this picture of you and that just to me brings so much joy. I see the joy on your face.
Yeah.
On that stage in that moment. And it translated beautifully to the camera. I don't know which appearance that was. I don't know if that was warm up or not, but
I think that was warm up one night. Yeah. The New York Times photographer was in and took that photo. I remember the yellow tie that I didn't wear often, but I wore it that night.
Eddie, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your piece of the history that has made up the tapestry of my mind and my subconscious pathways that are going on back there. I don't know how many impressions of you that I've seen on the TV, whether passively or you in front of the camera or at the desk or whatever.
Speaking of which,
what's
I was never security.
The picture that we're going to show next time you're on is you in a scrum at the desk, and Charlie Sheen is there. We're not going to talk about it now, but we're going to talk about that next time.
Okay, cool. Cool.
Eddie, thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for who you are and what you've meant to the Letterman community. Thank you so much for being on the Letterman podcast today.
My pleasure. You be well, and I look forward to the mental health thing. I'd love any way I can help and be part of that. Let me know.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that. Maybe we'll have you on an episode of HeCast. I love having comics on HeCast because in many ways, when it comes to men's mental wellness, stand-up comics actually, they get the bad rap for being broken, but really at the end of the day, they're more vulnerable and more truthful about life than anybody. So yeah, I would love. Yeah,
in comedy, the thread in most comics is vulnerability. The great comics, Pryor and Carlin and Lily Tomlin, and Jonathan Winters and all those great ones, they were, that's vulnerability was a thread. And by the way, one time during the warm-up, somebody in the audience asked Dave who his favorite comedian was. And it was weird because I had been there, I guess at that point, like 12, 13 years. And I had never asked Dave that. And I didn't understand why I didn't know that. And without skipping a beat, he said Jonathan Winters.
Wow.
And it made sense because how smart and inventive and silly and incredible of a mind that he had. So there's something people might not know, but if you were at that taping, you would have known because Dave answered the question. But it was really cool to know that was his favorite comedian and it didn't even take a second to think about it.
We could do this all day, and I would. I would take advantage of your time and do it all day, but I'm not going to.
We'll do it again. I promise we'll do it again.
Oh, man. Thank you, Eddie. There we go. I think this is going to be episode 3 when it hits.
Right.
But
you'll let me know, and I'll put it on the internet, and hopefully people will flood and watch it.
Thank you, Eddie. That's there we go. That is another episode of the Letterman podcast. I hope you're enjoying it. Please, if you have questions for Eddie for his future performance on here, his future interview on here, please throw them our way. Please share the Facebook group. Please share, subscribe. I don't know any of that stuff, but do all of that stuff to get this thing going. Let's build a community. Let's have some fun. Let's keep being the torchbearers of what Eddie and all of his cohorts did working for Dave and company. Thank you so much. This has been another episode of the Letterman podcast. My name is Mike Chisholm. Thank you and good night.
Overcoat and underpants.